The order papers, Madam, say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Dr. Dan Poulter.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to draw the House's attention before my speech to my declaration of members' interests as a practising NHS consultant psychiatrist. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the UK has a severe shortage of healthcare professionals, amounting to more than 110,000 in England alone. This is coupled with a growing, ageing population with an ever-increasing need for a strong and responsive health service. To address this shortage, the Government in England has introduced the NHS Long-Term Workforce Plan, with additional proposals also being set out in the devolved nations. NHS England's plan set out a wide range of mostly unfounded workforce measures, including doubling the current number of medical student places to potentially 60,000 doctors to be in the workforce by 2036-2037. Controversially, it also includes plans to increase the number of physician associates from approximately 3,250 to 10,000, an increase of over 300%, and anaesthesia associates from approximately 180 to 2,000 during this time. That's not to say that physician associates and anaesthesia associates should not have an important role in the future NHS workforce. However, at this time, there are serious regulatory and safety concerns relating to physician and anaesthesia associates that need to be addressed before the NHS seeks to expand their numbers and roles. Furthermore, standardised, high-quality training pathways and a properly defined scope of practice is essential. Physicians associates, anaesthesia associates and surgical care practitioners are collectively known as medical associate professions, and I may use the various terms interchangeably in my speech this evening. Physician associates and anaesthesia associates currently complete a 2-year postgraduate course and are currently employed in a variety of settings in the NHS, including in GP surgeries, the emergency department, medical and surgical settings, and they also have been introduced to mental health settings. I'm very happy to give way. Yes.
Can I first of all commend the Honourable Gentleman for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich for bringing this forward. This issue is massive. It's massive for me back home as well. So I thank the Honourable Member for his reasoned and knowledgeable debate and his contribution to the NHS over the years. But does the Honourable Member not agree that the fact of the matter is that without an increase in number of GPs and doctors, the healthcare crisis that we are facing will become an abyss? And for small countries like Northern Ireland, for example, whose students can't get places in our small medical schools and are training, then working and then living in other countries, are a real loss to the future stability. And we really need to do more to keep our young medical staff in positions rather than letting them head to greener grasses and far off fields.
Well, I completely agree with the Honourable Member, and as always, he's advocating very strongly for his constituents in the need to better retain our medical workforce in general, but particularly junior doctors. And I'm sure that the government will be listening to his comments, and I'm sure that there are things that can be done to improve the current offer to junior doctors in England, and indeed the things that could be looked at in Northern Ireland with the arrangements now being restored, that will get an agreement in place that will properly remunerate our junior doctors, and also look at the other terms and conditions of employment that are important in respect of retaining the medical and healthcare workforce. And it's not always about pay in these situations. It's also about the wider terms and conditions that exist. And there are certainly things that the government, I believe, could look at a bit more in that area, and indeed perhaps in terms of things like student debt, for example, as the Times Health Commission outlined this week, which may incentivise people to stay in medicine for longer. But I'm just going to return, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because we diverged slightly into the broader healthcare challenges, back to physician associates, which was the point of this evening's debate. And there are certainly concerns about the regulation and training of this particular group in the medical workforce. Physicians associates and anaesthesia associates are not currently regulated. There have been a number of recent high-profile cases of patient harm as a result of not being seen, harm as a result of being seen by medical associate professions, sadly with some associated deaths. And we know that, for example, there was a tragic case of Emily Chesterton from Salford who died of a pulmonary embolism, having been seen twice and had her DVT misdiagnosed as a musculoskeletal problem by the same physician associate at a local GP practice. We're also aware, I think, if anyone who watches the television programme 24 Hours in A&E may have seen some pretty enlightening scenes in respect of the clinical skills of some medical associate professionals, including physicians associates. And there are many examples of poor clinical diagnosis and judgment. For example, making initial decisions to send patients with compound fractures home without an X-ray having been performed and when the patient actually required surgery. In my own clinical practice, I've worked alongside some very competent physician associates, but there is a high degree of variability in their training and skills. And only last year I was forced to directly intervene to prevent patient harm following a paracetamol overdose by a patient who attended A&E. The physician's associate incorrectly informed me that they didn't require what's called NAC treatment because of their liver function tests being normal, in spite of the fact that they were over the treatment line as a result of their paracetamol overdose. Of course, at that time, the patient's liver function tests were normal, but they wouldn't have been for very long, and the consequences of that diagnostic decision by the physician's associate could have been fatal. A key issue for me is that many physicians' associates don't know or lack the self-awareness to understand the limits of their knowledge and practice. But as this is perhaps understandable, in a health system that fails to adequately regulate and indeed define their scope of practice. And there are many other areas of concern that have been highlighted in a recent BMA survey of 18,000 doctors, who, an overwhelming majority of whom have worked with physician associates. In November 2023, due to severe concerns around patient safety, the BMA called for a halt to the recruitment of medical associate professionals to allow proper time for the extent of patient safety claims to be investigated and the scope of the role to be considered. When the physician associate role was introduced, it was clearly seen as a part of the solution to a shortage of doctors, which currently stands at in excess of 8,500. By freeing up doctors from administrative tasks and minor clinical roles, it allowed them to see more complex patients and get the training required to become excellent consultants or GPs. Unfortunately, physician associates and anaesthesia assistants have been employed in the NHS in roles which stretch far beyond this original remit, and in many cases that have been reported in the recent BMA survey that I outlined, they appear to be working well beyond their competence. This has raised serious patient safety concerns, as I gave some examples of that earlier, and has led to calls to review the role, limit the scope of practice, and protect training for doctors that the NHS desperately needs. Because, of course, when consultant time is taken to supervising physician associates, that's to the detriment of training and supervising junior doctors, and that's something that hasn't yet been addressed or even considered in the NHS England workforce plan. Of course, I'll give way.
I'm really grateful to the Honourable Member bringing forward the debate this evening, and I sat in the committee when we were looking at the regulation. I think there are several issues which he is drawing out. One is around competency, but also about patient literacy. We're seeing a lot of emerging new roles, technicians, assistants, associates, advanced practitioners, and to the public, this is now becoming a very blurred space, not understanding the competencies that individuals possess and what the scope of practice is, but also where they fit into the medical family or indeed professions allied to health. Does he agree with me that we need to clearly define those roles, but also that associate roles should be around professions allied to health rather than being associated directly with the medical profession?
I fully agree with the Honourable Lady, and I'm going to expand upon that point a little bit later in my speech. And I think there is certainly a confusion amongst members of the public about what a physician associate is, and in fact many members of the public assume that they may be doctors or other healthcare professionals and therefore lack a much greater degree of competence. And given that it is a role that is now envisaged being significantly expanded, that is something that the public understanding and awareness of that role and the public expectations of what to expect when being treated by somebody in that role is a really important point, and that needs to be better addressed through the current proposals for regulation, which I'll come on to in a moment. So I just wanted, on that point, just to talk very briefly about the general practice and the ARRS scheme. The government has provided funding to GP practices through the ARRS scheme that can be used to pay for physician assistants and other clinical staff, but it can't be used for hiring additional doctors and nurses. That's quite extraordinary, and it results in GP practices having physician associates rather than fully qualified GPs. Currently, most physician associates in general practice are funded through the additional roles and reimbursement scheme, the ARRS scheme, which I've just outlined. And this is an NHS scheme which funds primary care networks to support recruitment across a very limited set of eligible roles. So the current rules for ARRS funding are causing inefficiencies as they're not flexible enough to respond to locality needs for healthcare staff. In particular, the rules do not allow practices to hire primary care nurses or practice nurses or indeed GPs, as I mentioned a moment ago. So over the past year, there have been many developments in how the government and the professions view the roles of physician and anaesthesia associates. But it does seem extraordinary that when we're talking about supporting general practice in developing the right skills and competencies and delivering the right service for their patients, that one of the key funding schemes doesn't allow them to hire the GPs or the practice nurses that they need to, and is skewed towards physician assistants. And I wondered if the Minister may be able to take that away, look at that scheme and help to provide some additional flexibility which general practice would like, and indeed seems eminently sensible to allow recruitment at a local level in line with patient needs. Now, I just wanted to highlight briefly significant concerns that are connected with the rollout of the Anaesthesia Associates project. Whilst the GMC has addressed some of these issues in their recent letter to NHS England, a number of concerns still remain. In particular, the NHS Long-Term Workforce Plan suddenly projected a huge expansion of anaesthesia associates, with no expansion in numbers of doctors in anaesthesia, or indeed, more generally, when we're talking about physician assessments in doctors and other specialities. To many, this looks like a replacement of doctors with anaesthesia associates, rather than employing anaesthesia associates to be complementary to the anaesthesia team, as had been previously portrayed. There are many examples of medical associate professionals in the wider sense working in ways that have caused concern, as we've discussed this evening, particularly in regard to their scope of practice. And anaesthesia provision in the UK must continue to be led and delivered by doctors who are properly trained and properly regulated. Anaesthesia associates are valuable members of the anaesthesia team in addition to doctors, but they are not a solution to the current challenges in workforce numbers in anaesthesia, and nor to growing waiting lists. The answer is to expand consultant numbers, an expansion in training scheme places for doctors in anaesthesia, and for the development of a larger number of specialty doctors and locally employed doctors already in post. Creation of specialist SAS doctors and consultants via the GMC's new portfolio pathway could create many more independent doctors in anaesthesia and indeed in other medical disciplines. And it seems extraordinary that we're not looking at that first when we have a properly regulated, properly trained profession, rather than looking at the expansion of a workforce that doesn't have, to date, proper regulation, doesn't have a certified training pathway, and indeed has been associated with a significant number of adverse patient outcomes and incidents. So on the subject of regulation, regulation ensures consistent standards for both the training of and subsequent practice of physician associates and anaesthesia associates. It maintains standards and, critically, it also contributes to patient safety. As per the recent order laid before the UK and Scottish Parliaments, registration will be undertaken by the General Medical Council. However, despite this, there are increasing concerns that this potentially further blurs the distinction between doctors and anaesthesia and physician associates. In response to those concerns, the GMC has now said that physician associates and anaesthesia associates will be issued with a registration number format that distinguishes them from doctors, and this is to be welcomed. However, the GMC must go further than this and present doctors and physician associates and anaesthesia associates on separate registers, whether that be online or in print form. And that goes very much to the point that the Honourable Lady was making, so that it's very clear that different professions are regulated on a separate register. And that's important from an accountability point of view, and a transparency point of view, and it's important for patients to understand as well. There should be a clear distinction between the register of doctors and other registers. This is necessary to provide the absolute clarity for patients and others who may wish to access the registers. And it's essential to protect everyone from accidental or deliberate misrepresentation, and there is no legitimate reason this could not be done with modern information technology systems. It's simple, it's about transparency, openness, and patients understanding better the difference between doctors and physician associates and anaesthetists, difference in responsibility, and I hope that the GMC, listening to this debate, will go away and look at that and actually ensure that there are properly separate registers. It doesn't cost much, but it's very important. But on to perhaps the crucial point in this debate is about the scope of practice. There should be a national scope of practice for the physician and anaesthesia consultant associates, both in their qualification and for any post-qualification extension of practice. Any future changes to scope of practice should be developed in conjunction with the regulator and should be agreed at a national level. I understand that currently the GMC will not be regulating extended scopes of practice, and this is very regrettable. For example, with a doctor, you will be aware if, for example, they're on the GP or the specialist register, or if they have just a licence to practice. It's something that these levels of expertise are part of the regulatory framework. So it seems extraordinary that when the GMC has been asked to look at regulating physicians associates, that there isn't an understanding of to what level or the scope of practice that physician associate is practicing, and that's something that needs to be properly mapped out and explored.
I'm really grateful for the points that the Honourable Gentleman is making. I think particularly concerning is that, say, a nurse who was a prescribing nurse could then move into being a physician associate, perhaps without being able to prescribe. So as a result of that, there'll be even greater confusion. Does he not agree that those kind of issues really do need that distinction and clarity being brought?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I was actually going to address that very point about prescribers a little bit later on, but she's absolutely right. And you know, there is a very clear agreement about some of the challenges that exist here. That when you're going to bring forward a workforce plan and the significant expansion of a workforce, these issues should have really been thought through before, because of that patient safety, particularly when there have been concerns raised consistently about the scope of practice in the past, and indeed about adverse incidents. So it's rather putting the cart before the horse to say we want to expand the workforce without actually dealing with these important issues of how that workforce is trained, how it's properly regulated, and indeed what its scope of practice is, and that is unfortunately a regrettable failing of NHS England's plan, something that I hope that they consider and look at. So if the GMC cannot do this in terms of regulating extended scopes of practice, the scopes of practice should be devised according to a national framework, and there does need to be an understanding of what that should be. It's unacceptable for employing organisations in the NHS to devise their own extended scopes of practice without reference to at least some national framework, so we know what good practice looks like and understand what it should look like, and also a framework that should always have the confidence of regulators and standard setters. Doctors should be directly involved in devising any changes to the scope of physician associate and anaesthesia associate practice, whether at qualification or extended level. And there should be no extension of roles beyond the scope of practice at qualification until national guidance is issued. And where organisations are planning such an extension, it should be paused for reasons of patient safety. Where physician associates or anaesthesia associates are already working in an extended role, this should be recorded on the organisation's risk register, and the healthcare organisation should ensure that it has full confidence in its standards of supervision, access to support, indemnity of the as anaesthesia or physician associate and the supervising doctor, and patient information and consent. Anaesthesia associates have a role to play in the wider anaesthesia team, but it's important to ensure this is a complementary role, as the Honourable Lady rightly outlined earlier, and they're in addition to the workforce and not a replacement for doctors and nurses. Expansion in numbers of anaesthesia and physician associates should not be at the expense of the expansion in numbers of doctors in specialist posts in the years ahead. Briefly on to the issue of assessment assessment. This is another area that hasn't been thought through very well. It's important that assessment for physician and anaesthesia assessment roles is standardised at a national level. For example, a national body undertaking the assessment, particularly the Royal College of Physicians, does a national exam for physician associates, but at the moment the national body undertaking the assessment process for anaesthesia associates would also needs to be established as being the best way to ensure confidence in the competencies of anaesthesia associates. It may be possible for this to be delivered locally with very stringent controls in place to ensure that consistency is maintained, but before that particular workforce of anaesthesia associates is expanded, there needs to be some form of assessment process of their competency. On indemnity, which again goes to the Honourable Lady's point earlier, further information is needed around indemnity cover for both physicians associates and anaesthesia associates, as well as for the doctors supervising them. Good medical practice explains that all doctors must ensure they're fully indemnified, and the standard should apply also to physician associates and anaesthesia associates. Many doctors in anaesthesia and in general practice and in the emergency department are already worried about the medical legal liabilities when working with physician associates, and clear guidance is urgently needed. While reference is made to accountability, more information is required in this area, given the challenges that we know have arisen. Prescribing rights, which the Honourable Lady raised. Some physician associates and anaesthesia associates, for example those with a nursing background, may already have prescribing rights from their parent profession. The Commission on Human Medicines is responsible for deciding which professions are able to prescribe, and it is important that they are clear in their guidance and reasoning in respect of physician and anaesthesia associates before there is a wider rollout of these roles. So in closing, I would also like to draw the Minister's attention to key findings from the BMA's recent survey, which took views of 18,000 doctors about the role of medical associate professions. The survey highlighted almost 80% of respondents worked with or trained medical associate professionals, so that would be well in excess of 15,000 doctors, meaning that contact with medical associate professionals is widespread throughout the NHS. Medical associate professionals are currently unregulated and with a poorly defined scope of practice, and the BMA survey respondents were very concerned about this, and are concerned that they have been employed in the NHS in a variety of roles well beyond what was originally envisaged as an assistant role. A staggering 87% of doctors in that survey believed the way that physician's assistants and anaesthesia assistants currently work in the NHS is a risk to patient safety. So for the Minister's benefit, that is the best part of 18,000 doctors who work with this workforce, raising concerns about working practice and patient safety. Yes, of course.
I'm once again incredibly grateful. Doctors in training clearly need a very clear career pathway, and with the arise of anaesthesia associates, and especially but also physician associates, many of those roles, more senior roles, will be blocked, and as a result people remain stagnated as doctors in training as opposed to getting a consultancy. Does he also see that as highly problematic, and the career pathway needs working through before there's any advance in numbers?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely essential, because at the moment the prerequisite appears to be a biomedical science degree, which could be incredibly variable depending if you went to Hull or Newcastle or London University. That could be a very different biomedical science degree. And then 2 years for a physician's associate, you then would have to go and pass your exam set by the Royal College of Physicians. But passing the exam doesn't necessarily mean you've had necessarily a standardised or good training. It just means that you potentially prepared well to pass your exam. And the difference with medical doctors is throughout medical school, and indeed through nursing school if you're a nurse, is you're consistently assessed all the way through your undergraduate training. When you graduate, at the end of that training, you're then consistently assessed as you progress. None of that exists at all in a training pathway for physician associates or anaesthesia associates. In fact, at the moment, as we discussed, there's not even an exam for anaesthesia associates at the end of the process. So it's absolutely essential that those issues are addressed as a priority. And it's little wonder that we're seeing patient deaths and adverse incidents and to the scale that we're seeing. And I would suggest to the Minister that, when he's perhaps suffering from insomnia late at night, that he may wish to switch on some old episodes of 24 Hours in A&E, and he will see the huge variability in the quality of expertise of physician associates, some of whom are very good, but some of whom are not. And it's the fact that we shouldn't be dealing with variability in the British health system that we're trying to address here. So the Honourable Lady is absolutely right about everything that she said. It highlights the last things that I'm going to draw attention to the House's attention to from that BMA survey of 18,000 doctors, which focus on this, that the quality of training amongst medical allied professions, or the physician and anaesthesia associates, 75% of respondents said was woefully inadequate. And the quality of their supervision when they're actually at work, 84% of respondents said was inadequate. The fact they work outside their competence, 91% of respondents outlined that. And the public would confuse them with doctors, as again the Honourable Lady outlined in her speech. 86% of BMA respondents confirmed that. And this isn't just a few hundred doctors. This is 15,000 doctors in a survey saying there are serious patient safety concerns due to the variability in training of anaesthesia associates. There have been far too many adverse incidents where things have gone wrong, and it is time for the government to give NHS England some clear direction that this area needs to be looked at, and some proper planning and consideration of the expansion of this workforce put into place. So the asks I have of my honourable friend this evening are firstly that we should ensure a standardised and quality assured training programme for physician associates, anaesthesia associates, surgical practitioners and all other medical associate professionals, and indeed that there is ongoing training and supervision to a nationally standardised level when that group is actually in the workplace post-qualification. Secondly, we should ensure that the General Medical Council sets up a separate register for regulation of medical associate professions to the register for doctors. Thirdly, as is the case with all other healthcare professionals, the scope of practice of physician associates is clearly set out to ensure that we can develop those appropriate training pathways and supervisory pathways, but also, more importantly than that, to ensure patient safety. And finally, that the government supports the introduction of a system with greater flexibility to hire GPs and general practice nurses using the ARRS funding formula. And I thank the House and look forward to the Minister's response.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich, on securing this debate. He spoke knowledgeably, both serving as an NHS medic and, of course, as a former Department of Health Minister. Let me begin by making a very important point, which I addressed during last month's Delegated Legislative Committee on the 17th of January, but, Mr Deputy Speaker, is worth repeating tonight. The role of a physician associate is to work with doctors, not to replace them. Improved patient safety and care is at the heart of the NHS long-term workforce plan, which, backed by significant government investment, shows our determination to support and grow the workforce. As set out in the plan, roles such as physician associates, who remain supervised by doctors, play an important part in NHS provision. It is therefore right that we include a range of roles and skills in our multidisciplinary teams that can offer personalised, responsive care to patients. It is important to note that the NHS Long-Term Workforce Plan commits to doubling medical school degree places to 15,000 a year by 2031-32. This compares to 1,500 physician associate places. In turn, this will mean a major expansion of specialty training, which we are committed to working with the Royal Colleges on. We have accelerated this expansion by allocating 205 additional medical school places for 24-25 academic year, with the process for allocating 350 additional places for the 25-26 academic year already underway. This demonstrates our commitment to the medical profession and reaffirms that we are absolutely not seeing physician associates as replacements for doctors. There are currently 139,200 full-time equivalent doctors working in the NHS in England. That's over 42,100, or 43.4% more than in 2010. Patient safety remains of the utmost importance, and regulation will help bring further clarity to patients and healthcare professionals on the nature of these roles and their remits. Physician associates are qualified and trained health professionals. They undergo a 3-year undergraduate degree in a health, biomedical science or life sciences subject, followed by 2 years postgraduate training, gaining significant clinical experience. Alternatively, some universities now offer an undergraduate degree PA course that includes an integrated Master of Physician Associate Studies. These courses take 4 years to complete. Their training involves supervised practice with real patients with at least 1,600 hours of clinical training. This training includes 350 hours in general hospital medicine and a minimum of 90 hours in other settings including mental health, surgery and paediatrics. The dedicated medical supervisor is responsible for the supervision and management of a student's educational process throughout the clinical placement of the course. Certainly.
Thank my honourable friend for giving. I just want to make one. I made the point in response to the honourable lady earlier about the variability of biomedical science degrees from different institutions. But the GMC wouldn't recognise a biomedical science degree as being adequate for a doctor in training as part of their preclinical studies. So, because of that variability. So, I just wanted to tease out whether this is an issue that my honourable friend could raise directly with NHS England in terms of actually putting in place a standardised training pathway for physician assistants.
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very valid point. This is one of the reasons why regulation is so important, and the GMC have assured me that, whilst they have the draft regulations out there, they will be further consulting on them later on this year. So I would hope, sorry, that's not a word, consulting on them, consulting on them, it should be a word, consulting on them later this year. So himself, BMA and various others can make strong representations about how the training framework should be provided. Of course, for physician associates, the GMC, with this introduction of regulation, they will be responsible for setting, owning and maintaining shared outcomes framework, which will set a combination of professional and clinical outcomes. The outcomes framework will help to establish and maintain consistency, embed flexibility and establish principles and expectations to support career development and lifelong learning. So, whilst at the moment there is significant variability in the system, I very much hope the regulations which we pass through this House on the 17th of January will help provide that clarity and help give the GMC the powers it needs to be able to ensure that the training provided to physician associates is of the appropriate quality for the roles that we're expecting them to undertake in our NHS. Physician associates can work autonomously with appropriate support, but always under the supervision of a fully trained and experienced doctor. As with any regulated profession, an individual's scope of practice is determined by their experience and training and will normally expand as they spend longer in the role. This must be coupled with appropriate local governance arrangements to ensure that healthcare professionals only carry out tasks that they have received the necessary training to perform. Statutory regulation is an important part of ensuring patient safety. However, it is also achieved through robust clinical governance processes within healthcare organisations, which are required to have systems of oversight and supervision for their staff. NHS England is working with the relevant professional colleges and regulators to ensure the use of associate roles is expanded safely and effectively. This includes working with the GMC, Royal Colleges and other stakeholders to develop appropriate curriculum, core capabilities and career frameworks, standards for continual professional development, assessment and appraisal, and supervision guidance for anaesthetist and physician associates. NHS England will also work with colleges, doctors' representative organisations, AAs and PAs to identify areas of concern. Specifically, the NHS is committed to working with the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges and individual professional bodies to develop and implement recommendations as a result. As for the role of the GMC, regulation will give the GMC responsibility and oversight of AAs and PAs in addition to doctors, allowing it to take a holistic approach to education, training and standards. This will enable a more coherent and coordinated approach to regulation, and by making it easier for employers, patients and the public to understand the relationship between the roles of associates and doctors and help embed these roles in the workforce. Indeed, regulation addresses many of the concerns that we heard in the debate last month and the debate today. The GMC will set standards of practice, education and training and operate the fitness to practice procedures, ensuring PAs meet the right standards and that they can be held to account if serious concerns are raised. GMC guidance sets out the principles and standards expected for all their registrants, and this will apply to PAs once regulation commences. These standards will give assurance that PA students have demonstrated the core knowledge, skills and professional and ethical behaviours necessary to work safely and competently in their areas of practice and care contexts as newly qualified practitioners. And sorry, yes, certainly.
Thank you very much. Just on that point, could you clarify where the liability will sit if error does occur, whether that will sit with the clinician or perhaps a consultant who is supervising them, because I'm really not clear on that particular issue.
Minister.
I think in many ways, same as many medical professionals, once we have this clarified in regulation, that this will not be any different from the personal liability of a doctor or others in working in an organisation. But these are the kind of things that the GMC will be consulting on and discussing with stakeholders in the coming months. It's important that all these points are clarified. Of course, many of the cases we've had, and of course, the Honourable Lady will know during the debate we had in January, the tragic case of Emily Chesterton was raised. In cases like that, unfortunately, we saw a PA move on from one practice and work in another practice, and we need to ensure that there is a proper, robust fitness to practice regime so that any medical professional can be held to account, and we can ensure that where something happens, that certainly they are held to account for what has happened, and if necessary they are struck off the register and no longer able to practice. So
It's being very, very generous, and I think we're taking advantage of the slightly extended time that we have in this for this adjournment debate. But it is a very important issue because it's about patient safety. But on that point, a number of friends said he's putting a lot of faith in the GMC doing things, I would suggest, very quickly when we know there are existing patient safety issues. Wouldn't it be more sensible to wait for the GMC to put in place the proper regulatory framework, the proper scope of practice, and the other pieces of work that are being done before we commit to an expansion of a workforce when we know there is variability and patient safety concerns?
Well, I feel that I'm criticised from both angles on this point. I have some people saying that we are going too fast. I have other people saying we're going far too slow. We have consulted, it was a number of years ago, we consulted on regulating these professions. We are now moving forward. Those regulations have passed through the UK Parliament and the Scottish Parliament. The GMC have had a long time to prepare, and in my meetings with the GMC they have reassured me that they are ready to go. Of course, they will want to consult to ensure that any further concerns that people wish to raise are reflected in the regulations, and they want to ensure that they get the regulations right. But they have known this has been coming for some time. When we consulted on who was best placed to regulate physician associates and anaesthetist associates, that was back in 2019. So the GMC have had quite some time, I'd suggest, to kind of be able to lay the groundwork here. I would also say that the long-term workforce plan, there is a much more significant expansion of doctors as to opposed physician associates or anaesthetist associates. It is a magnitude of 5 to 1, the number of extra doctors we're bringing into the health service compared to physician associates. So I would hope that I can reassure honourable and right honourable members that this is certainly not in any way about replacing doctors. Doctors are still absolutely pivotal to patient care and will be involved heavily in overseeing, of course, physician associates who are not doctors and need to be overseen in clinical practice. The role of physician associates, therefore, is in no way a replacement for any other member of the general practice team. They work in conjunction with and are complementary to an existing team. Physician associates can help to broaden the capacity and skills mix within the practice team by helping to address the needs of patients in response to the growing and ageing population. But let me be clear, the employment of PAs does not mitigate the need for more GPs, nor does it remove the need for other practice staff. There will be a wide range of clinicians like PAs that are well suited to providing care in general practice as part of a multidisciplinary team. But GPs remain at the heart of general practice and primary care, and that certainly is not going to change. As we develop and progress with changes to the NHS workforce, it is vital that the expansion of physician associates and their role is delivered safely. GMC regulation is a positive step forward in the safe expansion and further integration of AAs and PAs roles within the NHS. Can I finally thank my honourable friend for once again bringing the attention of the House to this important issue. I look forward to continuing to work with him and other honourable and right honourable members to ensure we get this right.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many others say aye. Which we know, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
of Commons sound.
Ended. The proceeding has 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 ended.